All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Pandemic Politics, the Policy Implications of Election 2020. Thanks for spending a little time during your lunch hour today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jon Melander and I'm a partner here at Boulay and serve as Chief Investment Officer of Boulay Financial Advisors. For those of you that aren't unfamiliar with our firm, let me give you a quick overview. We're an 85-plus-year-old firm of over 220 people providing traditional tax and audit services, along with several non-traditional CPA firm services such as estate and trust, wealth management, business valuation, amongst others. Our wealth management team of 30 professionals serves nearly 1,000 families by helping meet their financial planning and investment needs, and we have assets under care of just over $2 billion. I'll talk a little bit more about how we work with clients at the end of our session. Just a few housekeeping items. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and please mark yourself as anonymous. The chat feature will be turned off. This session will be recorded and you'll be sent a link to the recording afterwards. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is Susan Olson. Susan is a Vice President, Government Relations at Natixis Investment Managers located in Washington, D.C. She serves as point person for the firm and helps the firm maintain awareness of regulatory environment as well as legislative issues and initiatives. From 2005 to 2015, she served as Managing Regional Director, IAG Mid-Atlantic on the national sales team for Natixis Investment Management, U.S. distribution. Prior to joining the firm in 2005, she was Vice President and Regional Manager at AIG Sun America Mutual Funds. She started in the financial services industry with UBS Paine Webber in 1995. Ms. Olson received her BA in International Business with a minor in Spanish at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's a board member of OAR, a restorative justice organization helping people acclimate to life after incarceration. She served as board chair from 2016 to 2019. Ms. Olson also serves as an adoption coordinator for Homeward Trails and Animal Rescue Shelter. Ms. Olson enjoys adventure vacations and recently summited Mount Kilimanjaro. I think she's coming to us from Washington, D.C., where it's much warmer than it is here in Minnesota. We're actually getting 3 to 5 inches of snow outside my window right now, so hopefully you'll be able to enjoy that weather a little bit, Susan. But with that, I'll give you Susan Olson.
Thank you so much, Jon and Boulay. I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm not going to rub it in that it is a beautiful fall weather here today. So thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Susan Olson, and I am Vice President of Government Relations for Natixis. And our topic is Policy and Politics, a Country in Crisis and the 2020 Election. Because of the high octane election season, we are posting a lot of content to our website about the elections and issues surrounding the election like Supreme Court, etc. And you can visit our website at im.natixis.com, pull the drop-down menu of insights, and look for public policy. So today's agenda is going to be pretty simple, and we're going to first talk about what Congress is, or maybe better not, is not doing when it relates to COVID aid. Then we're going to take a look inside Donald Trump's campaign and former Vice President Joe Biden's campaign. We can take a look at pollings, and then hopefully we'll have time to look at the rest of the group. So let's start off with the bad news first. This is a timeline of what Congress has been doing in relation to providing aid relief to the United States from the COVID crisis. And we do call it aid relief instead of stimulus because the money that has been allocated so far really is aid, and that is to keep something from totally falling apart. Stimulus that you hear a lot in the news is money that's given to help grow something. We are certainly not, we're trying to grow, but this is really aid. And you can see that in March, Congress moved very quickly. If you can take your memory back to what March looked like, that was the eye-opener for all of us, how serious COVID was going to be. And Congress got the message as well. So they passed 3 aid packages in 3 weeks for $2.4 trillion. The largest, of course, which is on March 27th for $2.2 trillion, called the CARES Act. They followed that up a month later on April 23rd with a fourth package for around $500 billion, but that was a much simpler package. That was to really replenish the very popular and needed Paycheck Protection Program, which provides loans to small businesses, and if they follow certain guidelines, they can have those forgiven in the form of grants. So about $367 billion of that 467 was given to the Paycheck Protection Program, and the rest, $100 billion, was given to healthcare. But unfortunately, that's where the goodwill ended, because all four of those bills were passed bipartisan in both chambers. You can count on two hands the number of members that did not vote. They did what they had to do. And also, if you remember, in March, markets were really showing their worry. The markets were in correction territory, volatility was high, and they were waiting for Congress to do something. So it's been literally 6 months since Congress has passed the last bill. So what's happened since then? Well, in May, the House introduced and passed on party lines the HEROES Act, which was for $3.4 trillion. And that was kind of their starting point, but it still took the Republicans 2.5 months with their answer, which was the HEALS Act, a $1.1 trillion bill. And you can see from this page that it provided a lot of the, just kind of replenished a lot what the CARES Act did with stimulus checks, unemployment benefits, education, etc. But unfortunately, since they didn't offer their bill till the end of July, and they were set to recess on August 7th, the gap between $3.4 trillion from the Democrats and $1.1 trillion from the Republicans was too much for them to negotiate. So they left with their August recess without anything. They came back after Labor Day, hoping they could find something. Unfortunately, they weren't, including a mini bill that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell put forth for $650 billion. And after that didn't even pass through the Senate, let alone the House. It just, the negotiations have been back and forth and ongoing to really just building the bridge to nowhere, in my opinion. And so where do we stand now? Well, after a lot of pressure from moderate House members, Nancy Pelosi went back and redid the HEROES Act for, she said it was $2.2 trillion, but now we're finding out it's more like 2.2 trillion. Now we're finding out it's more like 2.4 trillion. And she and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who negotiates with congressional leadership on behalf of the president, they have been negotiating for weeks. You can almost call it months now. And today is the self-imposed day by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that if they can't reach a compromise today, that they're not going to bother until after the election. And that's great. Let's say they do come up with something today. That would be great. It would probably pass through the House. But the problem is these weeks and months of negotiation between Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi has been missing one very important component, and that's the Senate Republicans. They have been absent from all of this ever since McConnell's mini bill was voted down in September. They have largely been absent from this. And we've even seen President Trump dip into this. You know, there was some confusion a few weeks back where first he said, you know, he tweeted out for Republicans to stop negotiating. Then 2 days later, he walked that back and said, no, keep negotiating, and claiming that he wanted even a bigger package than Speaker Pelosi. And he also tweeted out last Thursday to vote for something. It was Pelosi's fault, and that the Republicans were on board. Turns out Republicans were not on board. Literally a few hours after President Trump tweeted that out, Leader McConnell at a campaign event, because he's up for re-election, said that he would not bring a $1.8 trillion, which is kind of the number they're trying to get to. He would not bring a $1.8 trillion bill to the floor. And that's largely because he has 10 Senate Republicans who won't vote for a bill, period. They do not want to put any more money on the deficit. And then he has another dozen members who are very hesitant and want to see what's inside of a bill. So basically, he does not have majority, or he does not have the number of Republicans that he needs to pass a majority sponsored bill on the floor. So if he were to take a $1.8 trillion bill, he would have majority Democratic support, and he's not doing that on the eve of an election. So he's going to offer up, I believe on Thursday, a $500 billion package. that will ultimately be not even make it out of the Senate, but it's going to be a campaign tool for his members to use to say, hey, we tried and it's the Democrats' fault. So bottom line is both parties have been playing politics with this. It comes to question whether either side had any intention of putting the fifth package through. And meanwhile, millions of Americans are suffering from not being able to make ends meet, forced evictions. And so it's really, really a shame that they could not find common ground on this and that they're using this as a political foil for either side. So that's why I say let's get rid of the bad news first. I wish I had better news for you. The chances of having a bill passed before the election, we literally have hours left until the House recesses for the day, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And then there's even question on whether or not they can get a bill passed after the election, because after the election, regardless of whether the president wins re-election or Biden wins, it's going to be considered a lame duck Congress, because we know that the House and the Senate will have changes from the election. So we don't know if they'll negotiate on that. Then you add to that the fact that the most important thing that Congress has to do when they come back from election is tackle the budget, because the budget expired on September 30th, but they passed what's called a continuing resolution to keep last year's budget in place until December the 11th. So they have to do something in those few days that they're back between after the election and December 11th to keep our government funded. They either have to pass a budget or they have to do another extension. Chances are they'll do another extension. So it's now, that means that we're pushing in a COVID aid package into the next administration, and that, you know, we don't know what the repercussions for the country could mean for that. So the only thing that, besides just the political part, what could force them back to the table is what happened in March, as I mentioned at the beginning, is that the markets capitulate, we go into correction territory, volatility goes up, and because Congress isn't doing what they need to do. So that's what could bring them back to the table earlier than expected. So that's where we stand. I don't know, John, if you have any questions on that.
Well, the only question I have is how much influence do the rank and file members of Congress have in negotiating these big deals?
That's just the shame of it. So over the decades, rank and file and even committee members have really lost their power, both in the House and the Senate. And so when you hear, like back in March, when you saw all of these bills being passed, the rank and file are just that anymore. They're relegated to the rank and file, and so they have to just kind of sit back and wait for the leaders to negotiate. So the historical $2.4 trillion that was passed really probably only involved about a dozen people, probably 6 from each side. And that's one of the reasons why the fifth aid package from the Democrats was so big, $3.4 trillion, because come on, there's no chance that a Senate majority or a majority Republican Senate is going to even consider a $3.4 trillion. But that was behind the scenes, that was Nancy Pelosi's olive branch to her members, because they do get very frustrated that they don't have a part in this historical negotiation. And so she went to her committee chairs and said, all right, go to your members and say, what would you like to see in the next aid package? That's why it got so big. It was labeled a wish list for the Democrats. They don't like that word, but that's really what it was. And so that's kind of where they are. And so unfortunately, rank and file members, they have, and not just with this, but with a lot of issues, they've just kind of lost the power, and the leadership really controls the big negotiations. You know, the smaller bills that don't make the headlines, they certainly have say in that. But that's a good question. Okay, so move on to the Democrats. So we are literally it's crunch time. We have 2 weeks to go in both campaigns. They're working very hard to rally their supporters and make their case, especially in the swing states. So let's take a look at where both parties are right now. We're going to go a little bit off of this slide and just talk about, okay, let's say you are the campaign manager or on the campaign staff for the Biden-Harris ticket. You are 2 weeks out. What do you need to do in order to make it to the victory line? So for the Biden campaign, what they need to do, focus on the swing states, keep the demographic advantage, continue to fly under the radar, spend, 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 maintain a calm demeanor and don't take the bait, and don't let the polls fool you. So let's break those down. First of all, the Biden-Harris campaign, they are on offense at this point. They are leading in the national polls, and they are in better shape than the Clinton campaign was at this time in 2016. However, in the swing states, they are polling more or less exactly where she was. In fact, right now, a little bit less. Right now in the swing states, the Biden-Harris campaign or ticket, they are up on average, and we'll look at these swing states later, but on average, they're up about 4 points. And frankly, Hillary Clinton at this time last year was up around 4.5. So where a half a point isn't, it's totally within the margin of error, they're still a little bit down. And we know that the swing states is where Hillary Clinton lost the campaign last year. So you can't get lazy on that, and you have to focus on those swing states. And so as far as the demographic advantage, the Biden-Harris ticket have had that, where the Trump campaign really has most of just one demographic. In their camp, the Bidens have multiple. They have the young voter, the Gen Z, the millennials, they have the black vote, the suburban women who broke for Trump and over Hillary Clinton in 2016 have now been polling very strongly for Biden. And then another demographic that is a surprise to all, both the Biden and the Trump, is that the 65 and over crowd have really been breaking for the Biden and Harris ticket. We kind of think that's because President Trump polls very low with his COVID response, and that is reflecting in that 65 or older vote. So he really is going out. So when he's in these swing states, making sure that he is trying to target and keep a lot of those demographics, especially that 65 and over, because he's been polling so high with that crowd for months, we thought by now it would start to come in. And actually in a couple polls it has, but in most polls it still shows that the Biden-Harris ticket is still dominating. So you really want to focus on that. And then continue to fly under the radar. What does that mean? Well, Biden has found himself in a very unique position. He is not getting the media attention most presidential challengers have at this point in the campaign. He hasn't received the questioning that Trump has, and he's avoided any tough grilling on issues that especially the progressive wing of his party want him to talk on, just like stacking the Supreme Court and the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. He's avoided a lot of those questions. Now, he is starting to see some, and we'll see what happens in the Thursday debate on October 22nd if he gets some more of those. But day to day, he's not being grilled. And if you think about it, it's really not that surprising, because ever since, was it 5 years ago, when at the time, citizen or candidate Trump descended the escalator in the Trump Tower to announce his presidency or run for presidency, the media has been obsessed with him. And Trump is just as obsessed with the media. He wants to stay top of the headlines for everything. And so this dynamic leaves little space for Biden. And even though the media actually gives the President Trump a ton of free media, and like in 2016, if you tried to monetize the amount of free media that candidate Trump received at that time, it's like $5 or $6 billion. And so where that's great, and it usually is an advantage for him, it might be turning that he's actually giving Biden a free pass from having to do that. So just continue to fly under the radar and spend, spend, spend. Biden and Harris are raising record amount of cash. And that doesn't even include the billions, and I mean billions of dollars that outside Democratic super PACs have raised. This is the first year that Democrats have really allowed super PACs to come into their campaigns. And boy, once they made that decision to let them in, they are raising tons of money. So they are outspending the Trump campaign nationwide on television advertising. even in Republican-leaning states. So maintain a calm demeanor and don't take the bait. In the first debate, Trump successfully antagonized Biden, who gave in, fought back, did name calling, everything that he did not want to do. At his recent town hall event that occurred in lieu of the second scheduled debate, we did see Joe Biden return to form. He backed his answers with personal experience, with historical perspective. So voters who are tired of the president's aggressive personality and are looking for someone who is more mild-mannered, Biden did do that in that second town hall, or in that town hall. So on Thursday, if Biden can resist the urge to strike back at Trump's verbal attacks, it will be to his benefit. And you might have seen that the debate committee said that they're going to mute the microphones on both candidates when they're not speaking. Now, the president, of course, his knee-jerk reaction is to hate that. He does not like to be controlled or told what to do, but it could actually benefit both candidates so that they could maybe use those 2 minutes to get their thoughts together, to get their act together, to calm down a little bit, and do what everyone was hoping that they would see on September 29th, and what they did see on the vice presidential debate, to hear policy, to hear strategy, to talk to the American people. So that will work for Biden as well. And then don't let the polls fool you. The Biden and Harris campaign need to be very leery of taking their national polling lead over Trump for granted. Now, I said in the swing states that he's actually doing fractionally lower than what Hillary was doing, but in the national polls, he is up in between 9 and 10 points, where Hillary was up around 6 points, but that is nothing to get lazy on. So Trump remains within striking distance, and so this election is anything but decided. As far as Biden's policies, we do think on China he'll be less hawkish, maybe unwind the last round of tariffs, not put any more tariffs on. Taxes we'll address on the next slide. On infrastructure, we do believe that he wants to do an infrastructure package. Healthcare, protect the ACA if it doesn't get shot down on November the 11th when it goes in front of the Supreme Court. If it does, he'll have to come up with another one. On climate, we know he's probably going to reinstate some regulation on the fossil fuel industry and put some more environmental protections in place. Finally, with race relations, we do think that will find its way into a lot of his policies, where he tries to address inequalities in jobs and healthcare, their economics, housing. So we do think that race relations will play a part in any of his policies. So real quick, Biden's policies. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. On the corporate, he wants to take that from 21% to 28%. He wants to put a 15% minimum tax on corporations with $100 million or greater in book income. The reason for this is that our country's largest corporations, the S&P 500, even the top 10, they really get away with paying no taxes. Between finding loopholes and write-offs, they walk away with paying no taxes, and the Biden administration wants to put an end to that. For individuals, there's a lot of talk about what he wants to do. I've seen the Trump ads where it says that he is going to attack all income earners. According to his plan, that's not true. He really is focusing on people making over $400,000 a year. So with the individuals, he would take the tax rate from 37% up to 39.6%, and that's where it was before the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. He also, I don't have it on here, I thought I had updated this, but for the FICA tax, or the payroll tax, which funds Social Security, it's at 12.4%. That's split between the employer and the employee, unless, of course, you're self-employed, then you pay it all. But right now, you pay that 12.4% tax up to $137,700 in income, and then you don't pay it anymore. What the Biden proposal what the Biden tax plan is proposing is that once you start making over $400,000 a year, that 12.4 kicks back in. Now, that's not to say they're going to go claw back that 12.4% from that income of $137,000 to $400,000. That would remain exempt. But once you start making $401,000, you start paying that 12.4%. And they're doing this because based upon their studies, it shows that we will keep Social Security funded for longer. And they also are proposing to eliminate a step-up basis for inherited assets with capital gains. So the step-up basis for accounting method is if you leave your estate to an heir, that they have a stepped-up cost basis. What that means is if you bought a stock at $10 and you will that to one of your heirs, not your spouse, but an heir, and on your date of death, that stock is worth $100, that your heirs inherit the $100 cost basis and not your original $10 cost basis. So that is on the menu as well. Now, I will say that all the tax calls that I've been on, that if they had to, that necessarily isn't at the top of their agenda. However, as a lobbyist here in Washington, D.C., working on tax and retirement, this is constantly an issue. It's a whack-a-mole issue. We're constantly having to bat this down, so we would continue to do that as well. But this is on their policies. Then there's always a question on, what would happen if, the Democrats took over everything, and would that just be awful for the markets? And this here shows you the S&P 500 average return by White House and congressional control from 1928. And as you can see, a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress has returned 14.4% average annually by average on the S&P. So the message here is talk to your advisors and don't panic. Democrats in control does not mean we're going to lose all of our wealth. So let's take a look at the the Trump campaign. So again, if you are on President Trump's reelection staff, what are you doing right now? Well, you want to, first of all, continue to argue that Biden is just too progressive, that he is not fit to replace you. Of course, we hear that all the time, that Biden is a Trojan horse to let the socialist and radical left in, and that he is just mentally unfit. So continue to do that. Number two, remind voters how good the economy was during Trump's first 3 years in office. Next, work to strengthen falling support amongst that 65 and over age group I mentioned. Continue to hold rallies, especially in the swing states. Spend wisely in the face of fundraising challenges. Try to get a COVID deal through Congress. And finally, ignore the polls. So starting at the top, continue to argue that, that Biden is too progressive and not fit. So the president is a skilled campaigner. We will certainly see him continue to engage in pointed attacks against his detractors, specifically Joe Biden, especially at his rallies. He will spend the first half an hour of his rallies just railing on Biden. So we know he can do that. As far as reminding voters how good the economy was, he really needs to stay on message with this. But however, keeping him on message as it relates to broader campaign issues like the economy tends to be a challenge. The president has a tendency to bring up issues like last week he was talking about Hillary Clinton's emails from 2016. This is not important. It has nothing to do with this year's election. And so the president does have a problem, not staying on message. And most GOP officials want him to talk about the economy at every single opportunity because this is where he polls very well. The 65 and older, again, I mentioned with Biden, that has been a big surprise. But so far, we don't know if it's a fluke or not. So you do see that his campaigning, his ads are really starting to target towards the 65 and older, hoping that once they get to the polls, they will change their mind and cast his vote for him. On his rallies, the president had to get off the road for a week because of his COVID diagnosis, but now we know he is back and back big. He is hitting 3, 4, 5 cities in multiple states in a single day. And he's focusing on what are now competitive states like Iowa and Georgia that he won, by good margins that have all of a sudden become competitive. So they won't admit that, but they are. So they're focusing on that. And, with these rallies, we know that Trump is going to absolutely outwork Biden, just like he outworked Hillary Clinton in 2016. He is going to just run circles around him. with the money. So the Trump campaign finds themselves in some financial challenges when it comes to his campaign. They raised the RNC, Republican National Committee, and the President's Reelection Committee raised a ton of money throughout this election cycle. However, we're finding out that their finances were mismanaged through July when they replaced the campaign chair with a much more conservative, old school campaign manager, Bill Stepien. So they're finding themselves, they're not raising as much as Biden. They're still raising a lot of money, but just not as much. And so, you know, the Biden campaign has been able to outspend them on TV from $2 to $1. And so the Trump campaign has been forced to cut TV ad spending, and especially in critical swing states. However, they are maintaining their digital ad focus. If you remember back in 2016, you know, they weren't raising a lot of money. Hillary Clinton was totally outpacing them. So the only thing they really had were the rallies and the digital ad campaign. So, you know, they're going back, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it worked in 2016, it can work again. So you are seeing them spend at least as much, if maybe not a little more, on the digital ad campaign and cutting back on the TV campaign. So, you know, we'll see how that works. And again, and then I said, you know, try to get a COVID-19 fiscal deal through. Trump got into this probably himself a little late in the game. You know, as I mentioned, Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin negotiates with a congressional leadership on behalf of the president. He saw about time. We have no concept of time anymore. So I don't know if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago when the president did insert himself in, and he tweeted at first on a Wednesday, stop negotiations, backtrack that. On Friday, he was saying, no, start negotiations. And now he's saying that, you know, he wants even more money than what Nancy Pelosi is saying. And as I mentioned, it would have been, a deal is not going to get through, but that would have been very good for the president. It would have been for everybody, but, you know, with the president, but that doesn't look like it's going to go through. And then finally, ignore the polls. You know, he was behind in 2016. You know, back then you had what they called the shy pollster, the people who didn't want to admit they were voting for candidate Trump at the time. We don't know if that's so much the case anymore, that there is that shy voter out there. Maybe some, but not to the degree we saw in 2016. This time where the surprise could come is a couple things. Number one, for the president to expand his base, I mentioned he did not have the demographic advantage that the Biden campaign does. So what does he need to do to expand his base? Because he has this very steady base of, you know, like 43% approval rating, that just, they're going to walk on glass to get to the polls to vote for him. So we know that. But 43% is not even enough to win the Electoral College. So where is he going to make up that 4, 5, 6%? What they have been focusing on is trying to replicate what a Trump supporter looks like now, from the same demographic, geographic, and ideological makeup. And so, but reach out to those people who look like a Trump supporter, but who rarely vote or who've never voted, and incite them to get to the polls. So, you know, that's one of the reasons he keeps hammering on the law and order messaging, why he keeps hammering on Biden being progressive, you know, the Supreme Court, you know, those issues, and getting that person who has never voted or rarely shows up to show up. And some of the polls I'm looking at are showing signs of that people who identify as a rarely or never voter are breaking for the president more so than what Joe Biden is. So that could be a surprise. And then also, you never know what shenanigans are out there. You know, I've seen reports that people who are Trump supporter but get contacted by a pollster are telling the pollster that they're voting for Biden. I don't know. That is like totally left, you know, out of the field, but we don't know what's going to happen. My point with this is saying, do not count out the president. Do not just rely solely upon what the polls are showing, because we can always have something coming in from left field, like we saw in 2016. This election is anything but decided, and I see a lot of my colleagues and pundits, people I read, starting to predict. I think that's a fool's errand. You cannot predict. And then as far as his policies, he hasn't put out his policies for the next administration, so we just have to look at what he's already done. The only thing we think he put in would be an infrastructure package, which is bipartisan supported, but any infrastructure package is going to have to find revenue raisers. So I mentioned Biden's, we talked about candidate Biden's tax proposals. A lot of that money is going to fund his infrastructure proposal, whereas the president, he's talking about using private and public funding. The private is obvious, he got to the private sector, maybe issue private bonds that we can buy, et cetera. But even on the public side, they're going to have to find a revenue raiser. He is not going to get Republican support to put any money for, not even moderate Democratic support, to put an infrastructure package on our already bloated deficit. So even with the President Trump's $1 trillion package, we might see some kind of raise in taxes. We just have no idea what that would look like. So with that, let me stop there, John, and see if you have any questions or if there's any questions from the audience.
Feel free to send any questions in through the Q&A feature on Zoom here. But you mentioned Trump pulling back on some of his spending in swing states. I think I read that Minnesota is one of those states where he's pulled back a lot of that spending. How do you feel that's going to affect his chances to win some of these states? I know Minnesota has gone Democrat for quite a few presidential elections in a row. But I think he was optimistic that maybe he could take Minnesota at one point. But do you see a big effect there, or with the digital ads that he's doing, that you think that's enough to get him over the top?
Minnesota is actually an excellent example because he spent a lot of money before they realized they were in a money crunch back in July and August on ads. And we did see the polls start to move in the president's favor, which is why all of a sudden Minnesota has become a swing state. Now you're on the far end of that, but you'll see on my swing state list, you are on there. And if we look at another example, your neighbors to the south in Iowa, when Iowa had their caucuses, and Elizabeth Warren, who chose to not spend on the TV, she purposely chose not to. And remember, she came in really low. She was supposed to do much, much better in Iowa than what she did. And the Monday morning quarterbacks are really relate a lot of that to the fact that she did not spend a lot of money on TV ads. But so we don't know. And another caveat to that is this year there are not as many undecided voters as we have seen in the past. In 2016, I think you could safely say that there were around 15% of people who were totally undecided. And they literally did not know who they were going to vote for until they walked up and had that ballot in their hands and were marking it. And this year, it's probably closer to 4 to 6%, so there are much fewer. People have already made up their minds. We've seen the staggering numbers of mail-in ballots that are already in. As of this weekend, it was 29 million. I'm sure as of the end of today, will be over 30. So people have made up their minds. So we don't know if ad campaigns are going to make the difference that they made in 2016. But again, Minnesota is a great example. In 2016, because of the spend that was done, how it did move the polls. But then again, President Trump's digital campaign is very, very powerful. So that's going to be a very interesting stat afterwards to see if that made a difference.
Thank you. We do have a few questions that have come in. I don't know if you want to wait to the end or answer them now, Susan.
If they're sure, I can answer a few now.
It should be pretty quick. First question: does Biden's $400,000 income limit for increasing the payroll tax apply to individual or a married couple?
Individual. So this is just your paycheck stub, not your tax return. So if you yourself are making $400,000 a year, this is not about your tax return. This is about you as your self-employed, or your employer will kick that 12.4% back in. And again, if you're employed, you're paying that all. If you're employed by a company, then that 6.2% tax will kick to you on your paycheck, not your tax return.
That makes sense. Next question, will there be another round of PPP money for small businesses?
Yes, so within both, regardless if it's a 2.4 trillion, a 1.8 trillion, a 500 billion, yes, there will be PPP money in there. But what needs to happen is that these small businesses need another round, period. So if you are a small business owner and you received your PPP in May, June, July, whatever the case may be, you need it again. So that's what is going to be, what they're going to have. Now, the difference is how much money goes into PPP. However, there is still some money left in there, so it's not depleted yet. But what they need to do is allow for another round so that these companies can go back in and apply for a second tranche.
Okay. Next question, is either candidate likely to make a significant attempt to get the deficit under control if elected?
They both the Republicans and Democrats have different ways to go about that. The Democrats are tax and spend and want to grow out of the deficit. The Republicans are more cut, and then cut your way out, cut programs to cut your way out of a deficit or out of the deficit. I don't know how we cut programs at this point. Defense would be one of the number ones, but Republicans don't like to cut defense. We really don't have a lot of wiggle room around that. So I think the infrastructure plan, regardless of which party introduces it, would be a big help to get us out of that, because an infrastructure program, regardless of who, and I think it would be bipartisan, that would create jobs, it would create growth. And so we really kind of have to grow our way out of this deficit. How the Republicans are going to tackle it is by not putting any more money onto the deficit, which is why already you see, I mentioned those 10 Senate Republicans, and I'm sure there are House Republicans as well, but they don't have any power. But there's Senate Republicans who won't vote. It doesn't matter if it's a $500 billion bill or actually some of them might vote for a 500, but anyway, that they don't want to vote for any another next round of spending.
I do have a question regarding what policies will be pushed through first if there's a Democratic president and a split Congress, knowing that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is set to sunset at the end of 2025. How much political capital do you think the Democrats would use to get some of these proposals through? And then kind of what is that order of operations, so to speak, of what would be most important to them?
Well, first of all, everything that's been talked about so far is secondary to getting our country back on its feet after the COVID. So that's what has to happen in the first 100 days is a plan, a national response to COVID, an economic response to COVID. So that has to be first and foremost. And then if you did see, it depends. I mean, if the Senate turns Democratic, I think you would see them and the House stays Democratic. I know you said split Congress. If it's a split Congress, it's going to be a lot of gridlock, frankly, because Biden is going to want to tackle taxes kind of right when he comes out for split reasons, a moral reason and an economic reason. The moral reason, being that he's trying to address income inequality, and I mentioned that putting racial issues into that as well. So they will want to do something with that. And then on the infrastructure side, I think you would see something on that happen right away, because another at the top of Biden is to tackle some of the climate change issues, not the Green New Deal. I mean, there are elements of the Green New Deal maybe, but not the Green New Deal, regardless of what is said, from the other side. He's not looking to do a full new Green New Deal, but he is looking for clean energy, carbon controls, which, are real issues that we need to address. So he would want to do infrastructure through that, but also, to expand 5G, especially to some of the more rural areas with all this virtual learning, that is obviously a big issue. I'm sure people in Minnesota, I'm from Nebraska, know that that's an issue, for children who are trying to learn online, but they just don't have the broadband capability. So, that's going to be an issue in Minnesota. You all had the bridge collapse several years ago. Your bridge is not the only one who's at risk. All that needs to be done. You all have a beautiful airport, but there are a lot of airports around the country who are just in shambles. So I think that will be at the top of the agenda as well. And housing is up there, especially with if they don't pass a bill until the new administration. That's going to be a crisis in this country with people who have been evicted. Either they defaulted on their loans or they can't make their rent. That's going to be a big issue, and it's going to affect our poor communities and be more disproportionate to that, which, unfortunately, our poor communities, of course, we do have white people, but, there are a lot of Black and brown people in that as well.
I think this next question will actually get answered in the next part of your presentation, but can you speak to the importance of the Senate majority, number of Republicans that are up for re-election versus Democrats?
Yeah, so I have an old, gosh, I redid this. I must have pulled up an old slide. So right now, the Republicans have the majority of 53 seats in the Senate. Of course, there are 100 total, so 53 seats in the Senate. And there are 45 Democrats and 2 independents that caucus with the Democrats. So we're just going to call that 47. So right now it's split 53 to 47. There are 23 Republicans up for re-election versus 12 Democrats. In 2018, that was flip-flop. We had more Democrats than Republicans. But this year, of those 23 Republicans, there are 12 that are in very, very tough races. Again, I could go back. I thought I redid this. In fact, I know I did. But as of October 15th, as of today, you have these 2 Republicans, Arizona's McSally and Colorado's Cory Gardner, whose races are actually leaning towards their Democratic challenger. And let me just back up a minute too and explain what these ratings are. So solid means just that. It's not a competition. It's a solid race. A likely means that it's not a competitive race, but it could turn competitive based upon the margin of the points, number of points that they're ahead. Lean means it is a competitive race, but one side has the advantage. And toss-up is just that. It is so within the margin of error, usually by 1 or 2 points, that it could go either way. So, this lean, so both these 2 Republican senators are actually in contest where the Democratic challenger has the advantage. And in both of these, they've had the advantage for quite a while. So the Republicans are not confident that they're going to keep these 2 seats. Toss-ups, we have 2 more that have entered that. Loeffler is now over in toss-up, and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina is now in toss-up as well. So there are 7 Republican senators who are in toss-up. And then on the likely, I apologize, I don't know why I pulled this one up. In Alaska, Sullivan has moved into lean, and John Cornyn from Texas has moved into lean. So you have 12 Republican senators who are in very tight races. For the Democrats to take control, they need to but the Democrats do have Alabama's Doug Jones, who is not likely to come back. And then Michigan's Peters that might actually move over into toss-up. They're in a very tight contest. So the Democrats need to net 3 seats. They're at 47. They need to net 3 seats plus the presidency, because if you have a split Congress or a split Senate, 50-50, the president of the Senate casts a tie-breaking vote, and the president of the Senate is the vice president. So they would need to net 3 seats plus the White House, or they would need to net 4 seats if they didn't lose the White House. So I mentioned these 2 are very tough, and so are Jody Ernst from Iowa that might even move into lean. She's been trailing pretty significantly. Tom Tillis from North Carolina was way behind his challenger. However, his challenger got caught up in a sex scandal, so we've seen those numbers come in, and so that is definitely a toss-up. Lindsey Graham is facing a very, very tough challenger who's dynamic, he's young, and he is extremely well-funded. So so basically all of these. I think Loeffler might be okay. And the thing with Georgia too, and especially in the Loeffler contest, there are like, oh my God, I think there's like 12 people running for that seat, because the reason why Georgia has 2 seats, the Purdue seat is on the regular cycle, but the Loeffler seat is a special election because that senator retired. So with Georgia, you don't just pick the winner. That the winner has to have over 50% of the vote. If they don't, they have what's called a runoff election. And so the top 2 of the election, they go in for a second contest. That second contest or election in Georgia does not happen until January. And that's most likely going to be Kelly Loeffler, because of even the Democratic challenger so far is not polling above 50%. So chances are we're going to have a runoff there. So what that means is that if it's so tight, that special runoff election, and Purdue might be in a runoff as well, we might not find out who controls the Senate until after the January Georgia vote. But regardless, this is absolutely the most expensive Senate race we have ever seen. And I mentioned kind of that Democratic PAC money. Holy cow, it is coming in like water into those contests. So it is a very, very, very expensive campaign, and it is still up for grabs. Right now, if I had to place odds on it, I think maybe 65% chance the Democrats will take back the Senate, but 35 is still 35. So again, just like the presidential election, this is not a deal.
All right, I just have one other question here so far. Will an individual not married, filing jointly, or head of household making $400,000 see an increase in income tax under Biden's administration? Not referring to the payroll tax you mentioned earlier.
Yes, you will. You will see your income, your tax bracket go from 37% to 39.6%, which is where it was before the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and where it was under Bush. And so not any higher than what you've had in the past, but go back up to that amount.
I do have a question on the presidential race and the ballots, with the mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. Do you see a prolonged result, so to speak, of whether or not a winner can be declared, and then from there, do you see it being contested?
Yeah. So, dang it, where is sorry, I apologize. Oh well. I don't know if you can see my screen anymore. I had this all updated, but at any rate, let me share the screen again.
Sure.
So yes, so on the contested election, where it's going to really matter is when we see the results from each state. And I think, you know what I think happened? I think I had an update last night on my Word and it erased. Oh, there it is. Okay, I found it. Okay, this is it. This is the one I wanted to show. I bet you all my other slides are up to date too. Yep, see, okay. Somehow I got the wrong one. All compliance approved. Don't worry about that. But anyway, so the question is on contested elections. So what we're watching for is when the swing states can start processing and counting those mail-in ballots, because the longer it takes for them to do that, the longer it's going to take for us to see the results. Now, as you can see from this chart, that there are 4 swing states that allow them to start counting and processing all of their mail-in ballots so that they will be able to announce their winner on November 3rd, Election Day. The rest of these states do not allow for processing or counting until the actual election day, And then, of course, you have states who will continue to allow, account ballots X number of days after the actual election day. So for the president, he has one state that he has to win, and that is Florida. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal had a great article about showing the path for each candidate to win presidency. If you go to wallstreetjournal.com, go to the political section from yesterday, you can find this. And there's even an interactive, like you can take states and then you can see the percentage of their chances. For Florida, 91% of all the paths, PATHS, paths for the president to win involves Florida. And Florida, we will know the night of the election. If the president does not win Florida, the electoral math becomes very, very challenging. Because as you can see up here, so I explained the safe, likely, and lean to you. Of the states who we just expect to go Democratic, former Vice President Biden starts out with 216 electoral votes, whereas the president, even though he has a lot more states, only add up to about 125. So you can see he is at a disadvantage. So the president really needs to win all 4 of these states on the night of the election, which we will know. North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, and Ohio will be able to announce their winner the night of the election, unless the results are challenged, which is always a possibility. But let's say that does not happen, we will know. And if the president doesn't win Florida and at least a few more of these, it'll become very challenging for him to win. If he does, then it switches over to Joe Biden. If Joe Biden wins Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Minnesota, that's all he needs. That's all he needs to get to 270. So and of course with them, including you all, you don't start counting, and processing and counting are 2 different things. I mean, some states allow processing, which is just the process that the vote or that the mail-in vote has been received and that you have been accounted for. That does not mean they can open the ballot and start counting. So anyway, so you all can't start processing and counting until the day of the election. So, if it's tight or if there are contests here, then that's where it gets to be tricky. But if you want a clean answer, if it's announced early, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Minnesota have gone to Biden, then you won. Then Biden has won. Then he makes his way. But the president needs to win all of these toss-up states, plus a combination of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. We're assuming Texas is going to go for the president in this as well. If the president doesn't win Texas, then all bets are off. But right now he's up about 4.5% in Texas, and he's still anticipated to win that, although Texas is a contest as well.
Well, we have about a minute left here, but there is one other question that maybe I'll even answer. What would be worse for the economy, a Democratic sweep of the presidency in Congress or no COVID relief package being passed? I think clearly that would be no COVID relief package being passed. Is that correct?
100% with you, John.
Okay. And it goes, thanks for bringing up that slide. And I think that tells the story. Any last comments that you want to say before we wrap things up?
Just vote. Your state is extremely important. That every vote counts every time. And states like mine is probably going to go Democratic, so sometimes you feel like your vote doesn't count. But we are expecting a turnout tsunami. The enthusiasm to vote is extraordinarily high. It is 96% of people who are polled, and this, even though this is about a month old now, this is absolutely consistent. So you want to be a part of this. Let's be a part of voting. We think that the youth vote will actually show up this time. We say it every election cycle, but they are more involved than they've ever been since the 60s. So, just get out there and vote. The country needs you.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, Susan, for your time today. It was very educational, and we really appreciate it. For those that have additional questions, you can reach out to me. You can find my contact information at boulaygroup.com. And with that, we'll wrap things up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.